So hopefully you'll all come back and visit. Oh, and don't forget to stop by Zingerman's Deli when you do. With that, let's welcome our keynote speaker, Ari Weinzweig.
I got a gift and I didn't even do anything yet. With confidence. Well, I wasn't nervous, except now I'm nervous because you guys gave me so many compliments. Thank you all for having me. It's nice to be here. Do you have workbooks? Okay. So on the very near the second to last page has the natural laws of business, which are also, by the way, the natural laws of life. And the ninth one is that success means you get better problems. And we clearly have a really good problem, which is there's more of you than there are seats. But that's a great problem, because the other alternative is there'd be like 8 of you here and they'd be going, how come no one's here? But you could sit on the floor down here, you could sit on the steps, whatever works. You can stand up too, I don't really care. Okay? How's it going? Are you excited? It's a cool day. You know, we talked a lot about what subject I should speak on, because there's a lot of things that we train on, and everything from visioning to leadership to service to energy management and all sorts of stuff. But we decided on creativity because it just seemed appropriate to kick off the work, you know, to honor the work that y'all have been doing. So that's what I'm going to talk about. For those of you who don't know me, I'm very informal. I got dressed up for you today. So please interrupt at will, ask questions. We're going to talk creativity, but by definition, if I can do that moderately well, that means we can sort of diverge from creativity to bacon or really anything you want to talk about. My email is ari@zingermans.com, and if you have questions that don't get answered today, please email away. Just don't email me while I'm speaking, because it kind of gives me the creeps later when people are like, I'm listening to you talk right now. And anyways, I guess just to get a few logistics out of the way, and I'm going to tell you my story, but I go to the dentist regularly. I floss every day. Unlike many people, I don't have negative images of dentists. I was telling Dee McCauley, my uncle, my mother's brother, who was really probably the most positive male in my life growing up, was a dentist. And so I really, you know, he was a really positive piece of my upbringing. He passed away actually the week after we opened the deli, so 1982. But I saw very, you know, fond memories of him and Maggie Bayless, who's the managing partner in Zing Train. Her best friend is a dentist, and I like dentists. And I don't have any bad dental jokes to tell you or anything like that, so I'm not going to get into that. And I do floss every day. And I brush regularly, and my dentist bailed me out on Monday because I cracked a filling on Sunday night, because I'm old enough to have all those things that you're not supposed to have in your fillings, but it's too late now because we have them in there. And he bailed me out by covering me during his lunch hour and took care of my fillings. So I appreciate all of that. So anyway, I'm honored to be here. What I thought I would do is just give you a little bit of background on us, so you have some idea who I am and why I'm here, and then kind of move into my thoughts on creativity. Does that sound all right? Okay, it's good for me if you move once in a while too, so I know you're not completely asleep. I had them open the window, they had all the shades down, and I was like, it's so dark and grim. I'm not going to use PowerPoint either, is that okay?
I can make that available to people if they don't have a worksheet.
PowerPoint? No, I'm just kidding. So if you open this little workbook up, just to give you some sense of who we are. How many people have been to the deli, though? Let me check. A lot. How many to the Roadhouse? Fairly a lot. How many out by the bakehouse and the creamery? Okay, very good. And how many knew we have Zing Train and we do training? And how many have eaten our candy bars? That's like a tricky question for this audience. Okay, we do make really good, I don't really like sweets, to be honest with you. I'm much more a savory person, but they are extremely good candy bars. So I grew up in Chicago. I came up to Ann Arbor to go to school. I really didn't know what I wanted to do at all. My uncle, who I just mentioned, was very nice, and he wanted me to go into practice with him, and he told me that if I would just get my dental degree, he would give me half his practice, which was a very generous offer. But I only made it through like 1 week of chemistry, and I fell asleep every morning. And I was like, sorry, I don't think that's going to happen. So that was the end of my dental career. But I did, then when you get to be a junior in your liberal arts, you have to pick a major, and so I picked history with a particular interest in Russian history, with a particular interest in the anarchists. So probably none of you know this, but although you all know we have the largest football stadium in the country, probably none of you know that we have the largest anarchist collection in the country. Did anybody know that? You did. Okay, very good. So we have the largest anarchist collection in the country. It is about probably a quarter mile that way on the 7th floor of the Graduate Library. I'm fairly confident that more people are in the football stadium every home game than have been in the anarchist collection in its cumulative 112 years. But regardless, I like going up there and studying. So, of course, one of the problems of having a history degree is there's absolutely nothing you can do with it after you graduate. But I mean, that wasn't like a shock to me. I mean, I knew that. I'm from an academic family, so it was just, you know, it's like a little minor stepping stone, slightly better than a high school diploma, en route to some other degree, which I failed to get, so I was kind of the failure of the family for a long time. Mostly when I graduated, I didn't really have a vision. I'm going to reference vision briefly today, and you already mentioned it about Dr. Polverini. I'm going to apologize if I don't get all the names right. And vision is a huge piece of what we do, but I didn't really have one. David Whyte, W-H-Y-T-E, is a very interesting poet, half English, half Irish, and he calls what I did the via negativa. So sometimes when you don't know what you want, but you know totally what you don't want, it's still better to have a vision, but at least knowing what you don't want can help you get someplace good. And mostly I knew I didn't want to go home. I mean, I like Chicago, but I didn't want to go back. And so I stayed here. It seemed like a good place to be. And to be honest, I actually came to love Ann Arbor far more deeply and richly after I was finished with school, because I discovered there was like a whole town that I didn't know anything about, because I only knew like this part. In fact, freshman year, I lived right in that building. I didn't even think about that. In the far upper right-hand corner, room 6543, which is easy to remember. That's where I live. Anyway, so after I graduated, I knew I didn't want to go home. One of my roommates was waiting tables in a restaurant downtown, which none of you remember, but some of you who work here are old enough to remember. It was called Maud's. I went in there looking for a job waiting tables, hoping to do that. They didn't need any servers, so I waited a few weeks. I went back and I said, well, maybe if you hire me as a busser, if I do a good work, you could promote me. And they said, that sounds great. We'll call you if something opens up. And I waited 2 more weeks and they hadn't called. So I went back and I was like, hey, I really got to work. Do you have anything? And they said, well, do you want to wash dishes? And I had never worked in food. How many people have worked in food service? A lot of you. Okay. Oh, so it's very close correlation with dental graduates. Okay. You never know. So anyways, I had never worked in food and I didn't know you weren't supposed to want to wash dishes. So I just said, sure, I'll wash dishes. And they said, great, could you start tonight? And that's how I started in food. So unlike you all who made this like really mindful career and have devoted enormous hours of study and a lot of money probably in a good way to get into your career and really work your butt off at it, I just sort of stumbled into mine. But either can work. So I feel really, really lucky, because the truth is I really accidentally got into a line of work that I really love. Coming back to that 9th natural law of business, success means you get better problems. I have a great problem, which is I meet so many people who hate their work and can't wait to leave it and do something else, and I'm the other way, which I would very gladly sign up for another 100 years of doing what I'm doing. There's just so much more to learn about food and about people and study the history and how to cook it and serve it and teach all that to other people that I will run out of time. And I love having that problem, because it means every day I go to work and I'm excited to go, and that's a pretty cool thing. I also feel really lucky because I stumbled into great people. Paul Saginaw, who you may have met or know of, or some of you have read about, who's been my partner in all this from the beginning, was the general manager at that restaurant, and that's how we met. And we are now 36 years later, and we still like each other. And his father is 95, and he was a dentist practicing, you know, until what, it's 70, and he's so I have dentists seemingly coming out all over in my life now. It's a pattern that I hadn't really thought about till I got here today. But actually, ironically, that's part of creativity, is picking up patterns that other people don't notice. And whether it's in medicine or in food service, it's the same, which is when you're mindful of things that other people miss, interesting things start to happen, and that's a pretty cool thing. So I started line cooking, prepping line cooking and managing kitchens. I worked for them for about 4 years. I left there in the fall of '81. Paul and I opened the deli in March of '82, which is way longer than most of you have been alive, which is a little scary. We just had our 32nd anniversary. The original space was probably about as big as this room, although much flatter. And we started out with just me and Paul and 2 employees and 25 seats, 4 seats at the counter, 25 sandwiches, some cheese, some bread from other bakeries because we didn't have our own, some smoked fish, some salami, and all that kind of good stuff. And now today, if you look at page 3, this is a little box score of our organization. We have all this stuff going on. Our vision is that we only do businesses here in the Ann Arbor area. So all of these are located within 15 minutes of here. We have about 620 people working in the organization now. We'll do about $50 million in sales. I don't want to dwell at length on Zingerman's, but this is kind of what we're doing. What you don't see on here is we actually have a 45-acre farm in Dexter. It's part of the Roadhouse, and we're actually renovating the 1837 barn, which will be ready to go hopefully middle of May, and we'll start doing events. So maybe one day we'll have a dental school event at Cornman Farms. So do you have any Zingerman's questions before I dive into all this other stuff?
Where'd the name come from?
The name, yes. Maria. Yeah, they keep saying Mariah, but I get, okay. But I knew it was Maria, but, well, no, I have a name that everybody gets wrong, and you did a beautiful job of saying mine, but see, people who have names that no one else can pronounce are very sensitive to not mispronouncing other people's names, so we're doing really good together. Okay, so Maria did a very good job of pronouncing my name, but generally it's unpronounceable. And Paul's last name is Saginaw, which, no offense to anybody who's from there, is, you know, generally an industrial town, a Native American tribe, neither of which are bad things, but don't make you think of corned beef right away. So literally we went to his house, which then had no furniture at that time, and drank a few beers, and we brainstormed names, and we wanted an A name or a Z name in order to be at the beginning or the end of the list, because it was easier to find, which nowadays really doesn't matter because on Google they all come up just as fast. But when everything was in print, it was a lot easier, and that's why all those companies were like AAA this and AAA that. So we came up with Zingerman's, and it worked out. Kind of. Other questions? Yes?
Why did you decide not to go out of Ann Arbor?
Why did we decide not to go out of, well, I do personally go out of Ann Arbor, and we show. I like Ann Arbor, but I like to travel. Part of what I like about Ann Arbor is we have this great airport 20 minutes from my house that I can fly anywhere, but I don't have to live in a big city. So anyways, well, the first natural law of business, if you look back at that list, is vision. And we do an enormous amount of work on visioning, and I'm not going to get into it at length today. We do a whole 2-day seminar. I've written 5 published essays on it. But visioning for us is a huge piece of what we do, and I think it's a process, the way we do it, it's a process that's hugely conducive to creativity. In fact, it's all about creativity. Because visioning the way we do it is completely an inside-out exercise. Right? So whether you want to come at it from my affinity for the anarchists or from a positive psychology standpoint or just from having a good life standpoint, so much of society is about doing what you're supposed to do. No, it's true. But it's not that much fun to do what you're supposed to do. No, it's true. It's a lot more rewarding to do what you want to do. And I don't mean that you don't change what you want to do to meet the needs of the community or to meet the needs of your family, but it's very different when it's a free, mindful choice than when there's this enormous pressure to conform. And so the vision process for us is all inside out, and so it's just what we want. Why is that what we want? I like to know the people who we work with. I like that you see me at the deli or that I poured your water at the Roadhouse. I like to know the people that work in our organization. I like to taste the food, and the idea of having a Zingerman's in Orlando is not of any interest to me. In fact, it sounds horrible. No, and I don't mean that Orlando's bad or good. I mean, it's not my favorite city, but regardless, but Paris sounds great. But the problem is, I don't know the people that work there. I don't taste the food, and I'm responsible, and I take it personally. And so now I'm getting, you know, emails from people who are like had a horrible service experience or they had a terrible meal, and I don't know who served it. I don't know who was managing the shift. I don't know who cooked anything, and I don't want to do that. And I love that, you know, I can go like I do. I mean, I'm going to go home. I've been at the Roadhouse all morning, be at the deli all morning tomorrow. I'm going to go home and run after this. I'll be back at the Roadhouse tonight. You know, it's easy to get around. I like that. One more? Anything? Yes, sir.
I read somewhere that you guys were planning on opening up Zingerman's at the airport. Is that true?
Yeah, the press is often wrong. And no matter how many times you tell it to them, they get it. I mean, I love to read, so I'm a big press person, but it's just, you know, having been in a lot of articles now, and it's like mostly when I'm quoted, I just sort of pray figuratively that they don't get it completely wrong and make it sound really terrible. So if there's only a few minor mistakes and no crisis is caused, then I'm really happy. And then one day it dawned on me that that same inaccuracy on the things I said was actually true for world politics. It's just the thing is when they quote me wrong, it doesn't really matter. But when they quote the other people wrong, countries go to war, and then it was a little scary. We're gonna wholesale, like we do to 200 other places, our bread and our candy bars and our coffee and cheese to the people that are going to be running a business at the airport. And then I will personally be in the airport, like when I go to Portland, Maine to speak next month. But we're not going to run a Zingerman's business in there. So it was sort of right. But as you know, sort of right in dentistry isn't very helpful, right? So, okay, well let's talk about creativity a little bit. And by the way, our visions are on page 4, just to sort of walk you through, following Dean McCauley's question. These are the bullet points. The actual vision document is about 7 pages long, and it's much more detail, obviously, behind each of those bullet points. But on page 5, so what do you think? As Maria was saying, I mean, you're all going to probably be part of a healthy dental practice or an academic setting that's a healthy setting. But what does a creative culture mean to you?
Change for the better.
Change for the better. I like it. What else? I'm in no rush. I have till 2:15. What else?
Room for innovation.
Okay, innovation sounds good. What else would be in a creative culture? Yeah, I think probably open communication would make good sense. What else?
Challenges.
I'm sorry?
Constant
Positive challenges and differentiation, did somebody say that? Yeah, I like that. What else?
Welcomes the contributions of many.
Yeah. Creative settings are always diverse settings. And it might be diversity inside our head, which I'll come back to, or diversity in terms of people, or artistic or whatever contribution, all of the above. And how many of you would consider yourselves to be creative types? About 32%, maybe 33%. It sounds like the project you've all been working on is all about creativity. And it sounds like the design of the project is all about creativity. And I actually was thinking about coming here, when I was thinking about coming here today, I thought, you know, I better Google creativity in dentistry. Well, to be honest, it's not something I get up every morning and think about creativity in dentistry, but I did today. So, I don't know, I found this blog from this guy. And Rick Zullo, he said that people may not realize it, but there's a lot of creativity to being a dentist. On some levels, it's very pragmatic and scientific, but the actual work is like carving or sculpting. It's an art. You have many opportunities to use your creativity for problem solving. So that actually spoke to my belief, which is that creativity is everywhere and is important in everyone's life, whether they know it or not. So there's a little bullet point there about the crisis of creativity. So I speak, like I said, on all sorts of subjects. We talk on visioning, on customer service, open book finance. We have all sorts of stuff that we train on. We probably have 30, 40 internal classes. We kind of have our own little university going within Zingerman's. And about 4 years ago, when the economy was sort of in its low point, we started to get a lot of calls from me. I speak a lot around the country, and we started to get all these calls from me to speak about a subject that I never spoke about, which was creativity. And first one comes, then another one comes, and I'm like, God, I just, I could talk about all this other stuff, but I don't have anything on creativity. And I started feeling bad. And then I started feeling really bad because I was like, we don't even have any internal training on creativity. I mean, this is really bad. And I'm like, people are like, well, why not? You guys are so creative. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't know what to say. And they're like, well, how do you do it? Like, you're so creative. Like, who's responsible for creativity at Zingerman's? And I'm like, everybody? And they're like, well, like, are you like Google? Like, do you like give your employees like 2 hours a day for creative activity? I'm like, no. And they're like, well, when are they supposed to be creative? I'm like, all day. And it really kind of stumped me, and I'm like, I felt bad. Like, they want to like pay a lot of money to have me come and speak about creativity. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. And it really pushed me to start to ponder some of this stuff in a new way. So I actually ended up writing a whole essay on it in the new book. I don't know if you read this one yet, but it's quite an interesting study to find out about creativity. There's a guy named Kenneth Robinson, who's an Englishman, who's written quite a bit about creativity in the educational system. And he said, companies are keen to promote creativity, but they're not sure what it is or who has it, which I found to be true. What I started to realize is that when the economy crashed, the corporate world all of a sudden was in trouble, and the boat was sinking. And all of a sudden they're like, well, okay, start swimming. And everybody's like, well, no, we don't know how to swim. Why? Because they didn't teach them how to swim. So I started to realize that what we've done is sort of become what Maggie and Bayless from Zingtrain would call in the training world unconsciously competent about creativity. Okay? So it's not in the workbook, but there's 4 stages of learning a skill. You've been going through these with dentistry, and you go through it with anything in your life, whether it's driving, playing a musical instrument, or anything else. The first stage is what's called unconsciously competent. It's called unconsciously incompetent. Does anybody play violin here? A few of you. Don't be shy. It's okay. Is it bad to be a violinist and a dentist? It's a lot of hand motion with each. Okay, so if these guys were, what's your name? Kasia? So if Kasia was to come up and give a little demo of violin playing for us, we would all move from unconsciously incompetent into the next level, which would be consciously incompetent. In other words, we would still not know how to play it, but we would now have had some sense of what was involved because she would have done a little demo for us. If she were to practice with us a couple hours a day for a year, we might move up to the next level, which would become consciously competent. I'm guessing if you're doing what you're doing, you're somewhere between consciously incompetent and consciously competent. That's part of what going to school is about, right? And when you do it every day for years and years and years, then what happens? You become unconsciously competent. That's where you can do it without paying attention. Does this make sense? So none of these levels are good and none are bad. They're just what they are. We all have different things in our lives that fit into each of them. So I'm pretty much unconsciously incompetent about neurosurgery. I don't think about it. I don't want to think about it. And that's fine because, no pun intended, it allows me to devote brain space to other things. Okay? Driving. I'm guessing most of you are unconsciously competent about driving. That's why you can text, make a phone call, and change the CD and drink coffee all while driving. I'm not going to tell your parents, it's okay. The point is, there's things that we're able to do under pressure that allow us to not devote brain space either because we're so good at doing them. When you become unconsciously competent, the problem is you're not a good teacher. Because you're great at it, but you don't know why what you do works, and you can't explain it to anyone else. To be a great professor, You actually don't probably have to be, I'm guessing, the best dentist in history, but you have to be great at being able to teach other people how to be great dentists. You got to be good at it, but this is why in sports it's very rare that the superstars go on to be great coaches. If you look at the coaches in almost any sport, they were almost never the superstars. The superstars are all unconsciously competent. They're great at it, but they can't teach it to anybody else. The coaches who become great are almost always the players, men or women, who were almost good enough to make it or kind of made it, but they never got to the point where they could just do it in their sleep. Is this making sense? And this is what had happened to us about creativity. We were unconsciously competent about it. We were great at it, but I couldn't explain to anybody why we were good at it. So I started to actually back myself up and figure out what was going on. And I started to look at what was causing us to be creative and why all these other organizations out in the corporate world were anything but creative. And I started to learn what many of you might have already realized I'm headed towards, which is the bottom bullet point, which is whether you think you're creative or not, you are. Everyone is creative. Literally. And I started to realize for the first time a skill that actually went in the reverse order of the stages I just told you about. See, everything else we start unconsciously incompetent and we work our way up to unconsciously competent. But I realized that creativity is the other way around. We're all born unconsciously competent about creativity. Every child is brilliantly creative. Does anybody have kids? Do they kind of play around and make wild, interesting stuff? Yeah. Who here was a kid? About half of you? Okay. That's cool. It's different. Do you remember drawing weird things when you were a kid, or making plays at home, or talking to your stuffed animals? They don't want to say anything about it, but... No, but see, the thing is, we're all born unconsciously competent about creativity. Then as we get older, we start getting taught, yeah, so you draw a cat, they tell you to draw a dog, and you draw a cat, and they go, no, honey, that's not a dog. That's a cat. Try again. That's not pretty. Try again. Those colors don't go together. Try again. And what happens is we start to become self-conscious. And after a while, enough years of self-consciousness, we start to go all the way down. We become consciously incompetent about creativity. So we're born with the skill, but we lose it because we're so nervous that we're going to do it wrong that any 4-year-old will put out this drawing and not hesitate for a second. And if you tell me to draw something, I'm going to be like, I don't know. It's going to be terrible. I'm not going to show it to anybody. And this is what happens in life. And then organizations are made up of people that are afraid to put their creativity out in public. So, who here would like to be in a creative organization? Okay? And who here would like to lead a creative life? What about the rest of you? You don't know? You're thinking about it? Why do you want to lead a creative life? It's more fun. That's why I want to do it. Life is short. It's one of the things that I've learned, and those of us who are older know it. But when I was 18, it seemed like it was going to go forever, but it's not. And so I want to make every minute the most interesting I can. What else? Why else do you want to lead a creative life?
More challenging.
More challenging in a good way. We were talking about this. Going for greatness is challenging. What else? Yeah, it's totally enriching. I think that for me, the chance to have fun and be creative and be around creative people changes everything for the better. And if you turn to the next page, I want to just share some of the things that I've learned that have contributed a lot to all of this happening for me, because it's made my life far more interesting. And it's really about getting out of all the constraints that everybody else laid on me in order to go out and do stuff I want to do and have fun doing it and contribute positively to the people around me in the process, which does come down to energy. So the number one thing, having studied this, that you can do to be creative is to get around creative people, which was not that helpful when I read that, because it was sort of like when they ask you how to be more profitable and somebody says, make more money. accurate, but not that helpful. That's what they actually, I could tell you an accounting joke. It's two guys in a hot air balloon, and another guy, two guys walking down in the field, and so the hot air balloon is coming down towards the two guys in the field. They're sort of descending. The wind is blowing hard, but they descend down, and the two guys are in the field, and the one guy yells out of the balloon, "Do you know where I am, where we are?" And the guy on the ground yells up, and he says, "You're in a hot air balloon." And then before he can ask another question, the wind blows him away. So the other guy in the balloon says to the first one, he says, "That guy on the ground must have been an accountant." Another guy says, "How do you know?" And he goes, "Because the information he gave us was totally accurate but completely useless." Anyway, it's kind of true. Dentistry, on the other hand, is very practical. As these guys were reminding me, without you guys, we're out of business because people can't eat. No, it's true. So getting around creative people. Kenneth Robinson, who I quoted before, said creativity is related to culture. Cultural conditions can kindle or kill creativity. So how do you get around creative people? Well, one way is, I think you're doing it. By living in a healthy organization, people are more creative. Working on a project like this, I don't know much about the details of it, but I've heard about it as an outsider. It's by definition a creative project. You've put yourself into creative tension. Arthur C. Clarke, famous science fiction writer, anybody heard of him? So he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, all new ideas go through 3 stages. Stage 1, it'll never work. Stage 2, well, it might work, but it's probably not very practical. Stage 3, I was behind it from the beginning. Yeah. I'm guessing you're in stage 2. Okay? The reality of life is that when you have a great new idea, hardly anyone will tell you it's a great new idea. I don't know much about the history of dentistry, but I'm going to guess if you were to go back and look at the history of medicine or dentistry in particular, the people who came up with what are now accepted norms of good practice were probably rejected as crazy at the time that they went after them. Is that true? It's very rare that society gets together and applauds, whether it's Martin Luther King standing up for social change, or whether it's a guy named Kenny Saylor in Wyoming who invented the jump shot in the 30s. You know why he invented the jump shot? You know what this, who knows about basketball? Anybody? You know what they used to do before the jump shot? Who's watched a basketball game? Who's going to watch tonight? Oh, more of you will watch tonight than have ever watched a basketball game in your life, right? That's out of the box. So before the jump shot, does anybody know what they used to do? The set shot. So when you watch the basketball game tonight, what you're going to see almost every shot other than a layup or a dunk is going to be some version of this, and they're going to leap as high as they can and let go of the ball generally at the high end of their jump, right? But in the old days, they never did that. They had the set shot. That was where you got your feet like this, square towards the basket, got settled in, held the ball around your chest, and then you shot it at the basket. No, I mean, it seems ridiculous, but that's what they did. You know why Kenny Saylor invented the jump shot? He was short. In those days, it was considered bad form to have any air gap between your feet and the floor when you let go of the ball. I'm not joking. And I'm not a basketball expert, but if you study basketball history, people were reprimanded by the coach during practice if there was any light showing between their feet and the floor when they let go of the ball. You will not see anyone tonight in the Michigan game shooting a set shot. But the point is, 75 years ago, what was the norm is now absurd. The people who developed what is now the norm were considered to be crazy, inappropriate, impolite, et cetera, et cetera. So having the courage to go out and get around those kind of people is no small thing. How do you find those people? My experience is that the natural laws of business, which are on page 7, which you could really call the natural laws of organizational life because it's true for nonprofits like the dental school here at U of M, or they're natural laws of life for us as individuals. It's true for everybody. In my experience, all successful organizations are basically living these natural laws. They don't have to know their natural laws. It's like gravity. You don't have to understand gravity to know what will happen. If you drop your pen, what will happen? It's not a trick question. What if you don't want it to fall? What if we appoint a student group to study it for a while? It'll still fall? Okay, so these are natural laws. Interestingly, you've already heard a lot of them referenced in the, 40 minutes that we've been here. At least 2 of you talked about Dr. Polverini's vision for this project, okay? Most of the time that you guys were introducing was taken up with natural law number 12. Successful organizations, people are having more fun and they're more appreciative. This is universal. Okay, so what I started to realize when I was looking at this crisis of creativity is that when you live in harmony with nature, you bring out the natural energy, the natural creativity that's present in everybody. Our employees don't really know they're being creative any more than your 4-year-old knows they're being creative. They're just having a good time. The problem is when we live in violation of nature, what happens to the energy? When you operate in violation of nature and the environment, what happens? Anybody know about fuel oil? Are we having a little energy crisis on the planet? So we've overtapped natural resources. We're living in violation of nature. I think the same thing happens when we live in violation of these in organizations. When there's no vision, when people aren't appreciative, when we don't believe in what we're doing, it's not much fun. The energy crisis that's been created is quite interesting. Here's some numbers for you. This is a survey of the American workforce 4 or 5 years ago. Only 37% of the employees surveyed knew their company's goals of the place that they worked. Only 37%. Only 20% were enthusiastic about those goals. Only 20% saw how they could do work to support achieving those goals. Only 15% felt like they weren't able to do work towards achieving the goals. And only 20% fully trusted the organization they work for. How's that sound? Good? Grim. This guy named Dean Tucker who taught me this, he said, just to prove how bad that is, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to move from basketball to football. Let me tell you what that would mean if you fielded a football team with that kind of statistical set. Of the 11 guys who go out on the field, only 4 would know what goal they're going towards. Even more depressing, only 2 of them would care. When they break the huddle, only 2 of the 11 would know what position they're supposed to line up in. Only 2 of the 11 feel like their efforts on the field make any difference as to whether the team wins or loses. And all but 2 are just as likely to root for the other team as for their own team. And I laughed really loud too, but see, when you're working in that setting, has anybody been on a losing team? Has anybody worked in you had a part-time job while you're going to school in a lousy business? How's that feel? Yeah. And so the problem is out in the world when people are not having fun, when people don't believe in what they're doing, when they don't know where they're going, when their coworkers are not going for greatness, it's depressing. And when you're feeling down and blue and you don't have much hope for a better tomorrow, how's your creativity going to be? Bad. This is the problem, okay? The problem is when you have a crisis of creativity and you haven't tapped your creative skills for a really long time, you can't just turn it on. This became clear to me because I had had some, around the same time I had had some surgery. And it wasn't horrible, but as a result of my surgery, I got frozen shoulder. I know you're in dentistry, but does anybody know what frozen shoulder is? Oh yeah, it's fun, isn't it? You want to tell them what it is?
You can't turn a light switch on.
Yeah. So for your muscle basically atrophies and you can't lift it above shoulder height. It sucks is the technical description. So through PT, you sort of do these painful exercises, right? All day long you're going like this. But it's amazing when you can't lift your arm above your shoulder how quickly you can readjust your day in order to compensate. So you just pick the shirts from the lower shelf. And when you're thinking of what to make for dinner, you pick the stuff from the bottom cabinet and not from the top cabinet. And you could pretty much figure out how to live without reaching very high most of the time. But the problem is if you're in a crisis and the fire extinguisher is way up here, your arm literally will not go. And this is what I started to realize happened to corporate America. They lived so long with creative atrophy because people weren't having fun, because people didn't believe in their work, because their coworkers weren't going for greatness, because they weren't embracing the positive challenges of doing something meaningful in their lives. And then the economy crashed and they're all like, come on, be creative. And it's just like the same problem I had, their arm didn't work. Okay, and so for us, it's really about how do we keep that from happening? Well, the things on page 6 that come up next are some of the key things that I've learned about that will help you make that happen. The first is to share lots of information. So you're going to do that this afternoon by going and looking at the projects. You're doing it every day here by studying. But the problem in most organizations of any size is that people don't talk to each other. I mean, they talk to each other, but mostly to complain. They don't share information. They don't discuss the business. They discuss the weather. They discuss what the boss did wrong. But those aren't really very helpful. If they are kind of entertaining in the moment, they don't really contribute a lot. So creating ways to share information. So if you're going to go out and run a practice, a couple things that we do is we're open book finance. So that means everybody who works in our organization learns about the finances of the business. So if you come to work with us and you're a bus boy or a bus girl, bus woman, you're going to learn about the finances of Zingerman's $50 million organization within the first few weeks or months that you're there. Right? All of our meetings are open with very few exceptions. So that means you could be working with us for a week as a waiter at the Roadhouse, and you could come sit in on the partners meeting. In fact, we pay you to come. Because the point is to be able to share a lot of information in ways that other people wouldn't normally do it. Does this make sense? So learning in the university setting is all about this deep dive. So in order to be creative in your field, it's critical that you become great at the content of your field. Professional journals and conferences and symposia that you will all attend are all about that sharing of information. In a healthy setting, people want to share information. In an unhealthy setting, people don't share information. It's one of the ironies. Stephen Johnson wrote a book about the history of innovation, and it's one of the interesting things about modern business is patents actually diminish creativity. Because although everybody wants them in order to make more money, the problem is we actually hide the information and make it harder to get at instead of sharing it. Thomas Jefferson said, paraphrasing, that if I have a candle with a flame and you light your candle off of my flame, now we both have light. And I have no less the light for you having yours than before you lit yours, right? And so for me, it's really about sharing information and sharing ideas. The other piece of information I would just encourage you is mindfulness. Does anybody do yoga, meditation? A few of you. I don't. I run every day, but I've become very mindful, and I think I just want to encourage you to take in as much information as you can. And I love books, but it's not all in books. I love to read, but there's a lot out there that's just noticing the nuance of the people around you. And interestingly, how many people know Emily Kennedy? A lot of you. So I know Emily Kennedy from Zingerman's, but I also know Emily Kennedy because she was the valedictorian here, or one of the leaders of her class, whatever. But so I asked her about creativity in dentistry. She said, well, I don't really know about creativity in dentistry. But I'm thinking she's all about creativity in dentistry. She's so creative. When she was going into practice with her dad, she wanted to give away a Zang bar to every new customer. That's one of our handmade candy bars. I thought that was pretty creative. She just said, the most important thing for me dentally was to incorporate what the patient values into what I could do for them. Each patient wants or needs something different, and what the patient values may not be what I think is important, i.e. flossing, etc. But when we listen to what it is they want, it opens doors for what we offer and how I can help them get there. If they value preventing pain, I can do that. And if I offer more tools to that approach, I help them. Or replacing front teeth for a child born without them, or if someone has trouble sleeping, finding them some way to help them with that. Listening and understanding what each person values can beautifully affect what we offer. So I started to realize the mindfulness that's important to me with food, and watching you all eat and noticing the nuance of what you like and don't like, even if you don't say the words. It's the same in every field, right? And so being tuned into the nuance, the body language, the energy, makes an enormous difference. Is this making any sense? Musicians here, how many other musicians do we have? Not too bad. Okay, how many English majors? How many poets? Okay, so it's one of the natural laws, number 10, is that strengths lead to weaknesses and vice versa. So I used to think that my strengths and my weaknesses were engaged in this deep existential battle. And I was always hoping the strengths would win until one day I realized they were the same. All the things you're really good at will lead you to the things that you're not good at, and vice versa. So if you really focus on your field, you have a high likelihood of becoming successful. What's the problem if you devote all your energy to studying dentistry? What will you lose out on? Everything else. So one of the interesting things, I speak at a lot of food conferences, I go to a lot of food conferences. So in the cheese business, it's actually a thriving industry right now, is artisan cheese. How many people like cheese? Oh, a lot of you, excellent, me too. So when I ask, I spoke on creativity a year ago at the cheese conference, and I said, how many people are English majors? Like 50% of the room are English majors, poets, history majors, philosophy majors. Like maybe 5% of the room went to school to study cheese. No, it's an interesting thing. The beauty of this is, part of why artisan cheese is thriving is because so many people studied other things, that they're bringing these other disciplines into the cheese world in a way that doesn't happen at accounting conferences. No offense to accountants. Today must be my day to pick on accountants. It's probably in a meeting with them for 2 hours this morning, so I have to pick on them. But my point is, although it's critical to study the field that you're in your case dentistry, and to immerse yourself at great length, it's critical to creativity is to get outside of what you do. Because the creativity is mostly about connecting things that were not otherwise connected. Does anybody remember who Gutenberg was? What did he invent? Printing press. So if you study Gutenberg, what he actually did was just take what they basically used for a wine press and put paper instead of grapes. And what they ended up with was a printing press. Okay? So a lot of creativity is just about taking a practice, a discipline, a mindset, or an idea that existed over here and putting it into place in a completely different area of work. Is this making sense? The problem is if you don't get outside of your box, then you don't see those other things. So taking time to read poetry, to listen to music, to go to an art museum, to go to a little kid's classroom and see what they're doing, all of those things I think are rich and filled with ideas that we lose if we only stay within our own area. And I'm not saying not to study what you do. It's critical. Don't get me wrong. Does this make sense? Okay, and then the fifth thing is to systemically and culturally support that information. So part of the university setting is designed, hopefully, in order to create those connections. The problem is when we leave the academic setting, we're busy. And people have kids, and they have families, and they work a lot, and they commute. And pretty soon they lose the connection to all of these other things. So if you can create systemic ways to make those connections happen, I think that that's where the creativity comes, because people start to link into new things. So if you create rigor for yourselves, even though I know you're busy and I was in school and I know there's no time, but Sam Keen is a great writer and psychologist and philosopher, and he said, we always make time for the things we want to do. So somehow many of you will have time to watch the basketball game tonight, even though there's no time to study. And I don't begrudge you. I'm just saying there's always time to do the things that we really want to do. And so creating regimens, whether it's picking up an e-news from a field that you don't work in, whether it's going to a museum, whether it's calling somebody around the country that you don't know, but to systemically create a regimen, just like if you work out. Who here works out? Do you get in shape by trying to work out? Has that ever worked out for anyone? What do you have to do if you want to get in shape? Yell it out. You don't have to be polite. Work out once. Consistency. It's the same with creativity. The more you create a regimen that's bringing things in from the outside, the more you create a regimen. Every week I'm going to contact some colleague around the country that I don't know. What I've learned is most people want to help. And I'll bet you that if you were to look online and find some dentist that had good articles written about his or her work, and you emailed them and said, I read great things about your work and I'm really interested in how things are going in your part of the country or your part of the world, you'll have a new colleague. Because most of them will be honored that you actually took the time to write and read something about them. And all of a sudden you're connecting information and learning about dentistry in Taiwan and comparing it to here or whatever. And those kind of connections that seem random are not random. The people who are going for greatness, it's another natural law, do the little things that everybody else knows they ought to do but don't feel like doing. So picking up the phone or emailing or reading an extra article, you connect new information in new ways and all of a sudden good things start to happen. Are you with me? Is this resonating at all or does this sound completely crazy? Questions before I move forward? Well, it's an interesting thing is that the question is about how do you blend structure with creativity. So no structure, I used to think in my anarchist mind that no structure would be best. But actually no structure is not conducive to creativity. People do better when there's enough structure and values that they understand kind of the frame within which they're working. But too much structure is not helpful either. Somewhere in the middle is a helpful amount. For us, I think that the key is to create structures that require people to think. When people stop thinking, the creativity goes down. Number one. Number two is to create systems that actually look for change and look for opportunity. It's not on your workbook, but it's in this book, as I started to develop this theory that organizations, the way the leader processes information and ideas will be manifested in the way the organization works. So if I reject ideas from the periphery out of hand, that'll never work. I'm probably also rejecting the people on the periphery, and they actually have a lot of ideas. So I've started to work even harder than ever at welcoming ideas and welcoming people from the minute they get there, because I realized I could learn from everybody. So if we create a structure that says, find somebody new to the organization and see what they can teach you, then the system itself is creating the creativity. So for instance, if you said every professor will randomly select 5 employees from the new student body at the university, not in their field, and email them within the first week of the academic year and invite them for coffee. No, it would increase the creative output of the university, because you would have a dental school professor who would be meeting with a chemistry person or a history person or, God forbid, a poet. And that way we use a system to actually create connection that would normally not happen. And then people go, I don't have time for that. And I actually have come to view the other way, which is we don't have time not to. Because when we're stuck in our rut, our energy goes down. When our energy goes down, how's the quality of our work? Yeah, when the quality of your work is not great and you don't love what you're doing, how's your energy when you go home? Bad. And then how's your relationship? Bad. So it's all one life. And so I think it's the other way. We don't have time not to make those connections. So for us, just as a conversation, or as a real life example, we have 3 steps to great service that we teach. Figure out what the guest would like, get it for them accurately, politely, and enthusiastically. 3rd step, go the extra mile. But we don't, so going the extra mile means doing something for the guest that they didn't ask for. What that is up to you as the person giving the service. Because for each customer, it's a completely different thing. So for one of them, they want a taste of something different. For another, it's carrying something to the car. For another, it's a handmade card. Does that make sense? So the system leads people close to a good answer and then requires them to think. Other questions?
Besides great food that you serve, what is the other thing that brings the customers back? What is the other experience?
What brings the customers back? I don't know. What brings you all back? Service. Service is a huge piece. We have always said, and it's all the more true now because of the web, we got nothing to sell that anybody needs. Like, I kind of needed my dentist on Sunday night when I cracked my filling. But there's a million places to get food. And I could argue with you why ours is better, but the competition is not saying theirs is bad and you should go to Zingerman. So I think the service experience is a huge thing. If you were to look back on it, you don't need to, but the 2nd page of your workbook has our mission statement. Our mission is to bring people a great experience. And the food is part of that, the service is part of that, learning is part of that, having fun is part of that. How do we create the culture? How do you think we create the culture? Okay, so the vision, if you describe where you want to go, it radically increases the odds of getting there. That's number 1. Number 2 is real life, right? How we treat people. So whether you want to take it from an anarchist standpoint or whatever standpoint you want, Paul and I have never thought we're better than anybody. I think everybody's creative. I believe everybody's creative. I think there's a lot of buzz in the corporate world now about employee engagement. So they all know they're supposed to engage the employee, but they actually think they're better than the employee, but they just know that they could like trick the employee into working harder if they engage with them. It doesn't really work. Like, you have to actually believe what I believe, which is everybody we hire knows stuff I don't know, and every one of them could contribute something significant to the organization. So I presented one time actually at Microsoft. Somebody there they're called the HPs, so it's not the highest level, but it's the next highest level. I don't know why they called them HPs at Microsoft. It stands for high performing. But anyway, so I give this whole talk on our way of working, and at the end, this guy raises his hand in the back, and there's like 300 of them, and the guy goes like, so do you just like ask the employees' opinions so they think that you care about them, or do you actually care? I'm like, you really haven't been listening. But I mean, it's just, so I truly believe that everybody has a lot to contribute, and that whether that's creativity or insight into improving service or insight into improving food or finance, if we don't honor their ability, then they stop contributing. Well, here's what I would say. The question is, how do we incentivize? I think the money incentive is rarely the highest in a healthy organization. I think people talk about money, but in the end of the day, it's not why I mean, I've never gotten up in the morning excited about making money. I don't even care about money. Money for me is like gas in the car. I don't really understand how the internal combustion engine works. I just know when I run out of gas, the car stops. And it kind of sucks generally unless you're right next to the gas station. So for me, that's where the money's important. But what rewards me is seeing employees get excited about their work, watching a 4-year-old eat our cream cheese and loving it because it's the only cream cheese they ever had, and they'll never eat processed cream cheese and think it's good because they grew up on handmade. It's watching people in our community learn. It's the email I got from a guy from Chicago who came to Zing Train the other day to the visioning seminar, and he emailed me, and if I read you his email, I'll cry right now because it's so touching. about how powerful it was when he went home and resonated on it. That's what gets me excited. I think that when you create a winning organization, so it's a natural law is that people do their best work when they're part of a great organization, right? So when everybody around you is doing well, what do you want to do? Right. If you're part of the team, you want the team to do well. And when you understand that having ideas is normal, it's good. The problem in most corporate settings is you get in trouble for having ideas. And they do some version of, well, that's nice, son. You've only been here a month. The problem is, if you've been there 32 years like I have, you don't have beginner's mind. So when you've been at Zingerman's for a month, you see things that I can't see. I'm blind to them. You become desensitized to it. So they reprimand people. They ignore them. And I think our job is to kind of create the positive belief and the positive emotional recognition. And then the money comes too. So we have profit sharing and all that. But I think that's only one small piece, and I think the emotional piece is really a much bigger one. So. Well, we don't yell at them. I think that it's on all of us, okay? So organizations are systems, right? And if you watch any sport or any music and you, we heard about humility this morning, which is a nice compliment. So any great athlete will always tell you it was the team, not them. Any great musician will always tell you it was the band or the orchestra, not them. And so if something happened because a frontline employee failed to give you good service, which happens, we're imperfect, it starts with me. And there's something I need to do differently, whether it's being better leader, modeling it better, being clear about expectations or whatever. And when we did something wrong, it's a group failure, and then we got to approach it, what went wrong and what can we do to make it better. Okay, so just last thoughts. I just encourage you to have fun. Creativity, the funny thing about creativity is that I've taught you all this, but now I want you to forget it. Because the more you worry about being creative, the less creative you get. So really it's just about going out and doing great work and having a good time, about having vision, about being appreciative of the people that we're around, and about making a positive difference. What I would leave you with is just a couple quotes. One is from a woman named Tina Seelig, who works out west in California, and she said, essentially, if you believe something is possible, then it is. And I think that that's true. And I would just like to encourage you to just sort of let the crazy ideas in your head out. Not necessarily while you're working on the patient, but while you're in dialogue, while you're in school, while you're talking to your peers around the world or around the country, because some of those crazy ideas are actually really good ones. The idea of this program probably started in the same way, and I'm sure when he brought it up for the first time, lots of people said, that's crazy, that'll never work. And yet it's the willingness to stick with those ideas and see them through. And I'll bet you that there's 1 or 2 projects out there that will go on to do great things out in the world too. The problem is you can't only have the 1 or 2 without having the whole group. Last quote comes from Anita Roddick, who opened The Body Shop. Anybody heard of The Body Shop? Pretty famous company. She said, creativity comes by breaking the rules, by saying you're in love with the anarchists. So I just encourage you to have fun, and I want to compliment all of you on being part of a pretty cool program. It's great to feel the positive energy in here. It's not an accident. And I'm glad that you're out there, so when I break the fillings in my teeth, I have people to go to that will take really good care of me. So thank you all. Have a great day. Congratulations.